Welcome to America's Heroes Group.
Welcome back to America's Heroes Group. With our roundtable called We Are Globally Connected with Kaiser Health News. Saturday, February 25th, 2023. February is Black History and American Heart Month. Our host is Cliff Kelley. I'm Sean Claiborne, the co-host. Our executive producer is Glenda Smith, and our digital media producer is Ivan Ortega of Scouts Honor Productions. And we have our panelist with us, Cara Anthony. She's a Kaiser Health News Midwest correspondent and a multimedia reporter. Prior to KHN, in 2018, she was nominated for an Emmy for her 6-part Belleville News Democrat series titled Then I Knew. That work was about racism in America. And her most recent work, an article for Kaiser Health News, it's titled When Gun Violence Ends Young Lives, These Men Prepare the Graves. Thanks for being with us, Cara.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I appreciate your time. So are you a parent? I just want to ask that first.
Oh, definitely. I have a beautiful 6-year-old daughter. Her name is Lily Rose, and she is the love of my life, so for sure.
So they say there's a saying, I'm not sure if it's true or not. I don't know if I read it someplace in a book or something, but they say a mother or father's first true love is their newborn baby. That's the first true love.
Yes, that is so true. I fell in love with Lily just right away, and obviously through my reporting journey have met so many parents, but it's a tough time that we're living in, and it's a really tough time to raise a child in America because we worry about them. So much goes on.
So tell me about Babyland.
Yeah, so Babyland is one part of a cemetery not too far from where I grew up. It's in a little town called Millside, Illinois, about 30 miles outside of St. Louis, Missouri, where a number of young children and infants are buried. Many of those children are stillborn, infants who died of SIDS, other tragedies like fire and car accidents. But during my reporting journey, I followed a young 3-year-old girl who ended up there because she was a victim of gun violence. And so I got to know when I went to her funeral that day, I asked the caretakers, as they like to be called, their grave diggers, hey, can I write a story about you? And they said, what would you want to do that for? But a year later, we did just that, and here I am today talking to you about it.
So of all the dangers for children, and according to your article, what is the number one cause of death for children in this country?
It's gun violence, and that's surprising for a lot of folks because, again, people might think of car accidents or other diseases, things like cancer that children deal with, all the time. But gun violence in this country takes the lives of more children than anything else. Wow.
And then as a parent, how does that make you feel? And when you look at your children going out the door every day and then going out about everyday business, how does it hit you personally as a journalist, but also as a parent?
As a parent, I try not to worry too much about my daughter, but how could you not in these times that we're living in, especially with the number of school shootings and mass shootings that we've seen in our country over the last decade. I mean, I just always, I'm a woman of faith, so I say my prayers for sure, but I also know that there are parents that do that, but also take measures to train their children to know what to do if, they start to hear gunfire in their school or if they start to hear gunfire even in their home. Another story that I wrote a couple of years ago talked about where children hide, children getting under beds, going in the basement, going in between couches just to find safety. So unfortunately in this country, it's one of those things where we really have to think about it maybe more than previous generations. But it's definitely one thing that's on my mind, especially as I cover these things as a parent and as a journalist.
So back to the article, according to the stats, is death from gun violence going up or down? So what did the 2021 numbers show or tell us about death and gun violence?
Yeah, unfortunately, the numbers are going up. Now, many of those were gun violence, but another good portion would be gun by suicide. Suicide people have chosen to take their lives, unfortunately, by using a gun. And so it's a split there, but in both cases, always devastating for the families and the loved ones who are left behind to try to pick up the pieces and survive, themselves.
So how does that? So when you look at the what's being done in the world in your research and what you've written about in the past, not just with this article, what do we need to do in order to curb this problem?
Oh, that's a really big question. There are plenty of policies and lawmakers who are working to make our schools safer, to make our neighborhoods safer. People are also on the ground trying to have conversations with, young people, starting conversations early about gun safety, things like that. There are a number of gun prevention programs. I know Chicago has, a long list. The same goes for downstate where I am in Southern Illinois, and then across the river in St. Louis. I think those conversations really, start at home, and we go from there for now.
Mm-hmm. And in your article, you write about two men, Johnny Hare and William Bell Jr. Tell us about those two guys and what they do.
Wow. Yeah, Johnny Hare, he was one of the first people that I had a real conversation with just the day that I went out to the young girl's funeral who died of gun violence. And, I remember earlier in our conversation today, he said, I said, I would like to write a story about you. And he said, what would you want to do that for? And I said, well, your work is really important. And so we took some time. It wasn't anything that was a rush job. He's been doing this for years, and I really took a lot of time to observe him, but he is just so caring. He really cares about each family that chooses, Babyland or Sunset Gardens is the main, the name of the main cemetery. He cares for each one, and I think care is the key word, because during the reporting process, I asked him, I said, Mr. Johnny, that's what I started to call him. I said, what should I, call you? Gravedigger, is that correct? And he's like, it's not wrong, but I really see myself as a caretaker. And that really stuck with me. He's not just, digging graves, digging holes. He's really caring for, each family and, unfortunately, the child that is there, in front of him, whether it be a lot or just a few. He does it with so much care. So that was one of my biggest takeaways about how tender their hearts are. Even after 43 years, both William Belt Sr. and Mr. Johnny Hare, they've been doing this for 43 years, which is just incredible.
Digging ditches is not easy either.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly hard work. I mean, it's physically, taxing. You could imagine, they have their, backhoes, the equipment. But unfortunately, too, one thing that we learned was that the graves in Babyland, because they're small, they often have to dig by hand. And so there's just some physical labor there that they put themselves through, but it's so worth it for them because they're so serious about their job, and they want people to come out and, feel as though that their loved ones have been taken care of.
And then William Bell Jr., he had a brush with bullets, too, himself. Tell us about that in the article.
Yeah, on New Year's Eve, he was at a gas station in East St. Louis, and unfortunately, shots were fired, and he thought, maybe it was just like, New Year's Eve, you often hear gunfire. That's a tradition that a lot of people have, but he struck himself and hit by a bullet. He survived that, but in the interview process, one thing that he said, I could have been the one that my coworkers had to bury, and I would have been overtime for them because they've been so busy. COVID, obviously changed things for them. The numbers went up. They noticed that. That was another big takeaway during my reporting process, is that they recognize trends and they see that something might not be right based on the number of bodies that were coming into or that come into the cemetery. So when gum numbers are up and they start seeing a number of young people coming in, they get a sense like something's not right here. Same thing for, example would be COVID. They get a sense like, they collect data in their own way. I think it's the line that I put in the story. So it was just really heartbreaking to hear him say, we are so busy. There's so much going on. And I would have been overtime for my coworkers had that shot been fatal. And but he survived and he's, moving forward. So.
And his family had just suffered some losses earlier that month or earlier that year, if I remember correct from the article.
Yeah. Another big takeaway, so many big life lessons here, of what it feels like. We've all gone through the grieving process, whether it be for a close loved one or friend, but the idea of actually having to bury that person physically, prepare their graves, physically lay them to rest is just something that I couldn't even imagine. But they did it last year a number of times, and they persevered. It seems like these men, they just push through all of what could be easily called, emotional trauma, but they just do their job with so much dignity and respect for everyone, especially, their own loved ones. And so it's tragically beautiful.
Mm. I loved your words in the article. I thought your journalism was very, very on point. But on top of that, your writing was so beautiful when you wrote the story. I love it when I can read something and there is a nice marriage between the facts and the journalistic part of everything. But then on top of that, it's done in an artistic way that's not over the top or too flowery or too emotional or where it gets a little bit hokey. You did a perfect job, I think, in that article. When after coming through that experience of seeing something like this, which is really something that's left for a lot of people, is going to be left field because no one thinks about child cemeteries. Nobody thinks about children dying. Even if you're going through a serious situation, you don't want to see. You never think about or want to meditate on the idea of children suffering or babies suffering. How does that affected you and change your perspective on the world and change your perspective on fact finding and even in your work?
I mean, it definitely makes me, just on a personal level, cherish each day, cherish the people that are around me and those who also took the time to read, because it's easy to look the other way and say, I don't want to look at that. I don't want to see that. That's too hard. It's too much. But I think there are so many life lessons that I learned, and especially I think the biggest one, and it maybe isn't in the article, but it's an interesting fact that I like to share with people anytime we have a discussion about it, is that the caretakers at the cemetery, while in the same way it takes 9 months essentially for a baby to be born, they tend to the baby land graves and graves in general for at least 9 to 12 months before it's marked as done. And that really taught me that grief is a process. It's not just an overnight thing. It's
for a second, let's back for a second. What do you mean by when it's done? So they tend to the plot for 9 months afterwards? Right. They for 9 months they take care of it. So they'll, obviously they have to plant the grass. The first step is digging. But then after that, they have to plant the grass, take care of it, make sure that it's settling properly and, will be smooth and appear as the rest of the graves are in the cemetery. And then after that, it takes time to also, they don't just put a headstone out there right away. The ground has to be settled. So that is put into place. And, again, all of this process, for that grass to grow and to be mowed and it to look, like everything else in the cemetery, it takes about 9 to 12 months. And Wow.
So that care and that attention to detail, not just for the, graves and babyland, but for throughout the cemetery, it just really taught me, grief is a process. It's not just an overnight thing, that it's okay to take your time And sometimes in that process, you laugh a little bit. There are definitely moments in the interview where Johnny and I especially, we laughed, and I kind of felt bad. I'm like, man, we're at a cemetery, we're having this moment of laughter. But it also taught me that there are many emotions that you can feel, in doing that work, and also in the process of, losing a loved one. You might remember a happy moment and laugh, and then other moments, something might be really hard, and, you cry. So lots of lessons learned here.
What would you think is the most powerful thing you learned from the two gentlemen?
I just think that there's something very powerful about being consistent, being steady, and taking pride in what you do. That if you do your job, eventually, people will take notice, and they'll see that. They didn't come to me and say, "Hey, Cara, will you write an article because we have 43 years of service and we think that's, a really great thing." No, I just observe them and taking this time and care. And so I think that's one of my biggest takeaways. It's just like, do your work, do your job, take pride in it, and people will notice, and that there's no job that is bigger than someone else's in this world. Everything that we do, it really matters. So I think that. Okay, sorry, my 6-year-old just popped in on me, but yeah, I think that's the main thing. Yeah, she's there she is. But I just think that's really important. It's like their job matters. What they do, it should not be overlooked. And so that's one of the biggest lessons that I definitely learned.
So with that, you also have a lot of things to be recognized for in your career. You've had a great career as a journalist. You're very talented. Nominated for an Emmy in 2018. When you were nominated, how did that make you feel then, and what was your initial response?
Oh my gosh, that really, it was a big moment, because I came into journalism, thinking strictly, that I would write stories, and people always kind of talked about, oh, maybe you would go into TV or you would do things with film, but I never really saw that for myself. But when the opportunity presented itself to do a film, and then a film that was largely based in my hometown, I mean, it was just a really amazing experience, and it really made me appreciate my community and the people who, held me up in good times and in bad. And I was a single mom coming in and really trying to hold on to my career, and the community really just embraced me, and they still are. Babyland is only a few miles away from where I grew up, and so I'm covering stories about my hometown that really matter. That moment really was just so special, because I shared it not only with my family but with the entire community. So,
what's going on next? So, what's your next article going to be about?
That's a good question. I've been working on, so Babyland was a part of a series that was largely based on this idea of communal mourning, meaning, we don't just grieve alone in a bubble, that oftentimes, especially when we lose a child, a community grieves, and we all feel that pain, and that there are people that show up. Back in the day for me, when I was a little youngster, it was the church, the mothers of the church would show up and show out and, cover families. But the faces, are changing. A lot of those women, unfortunately, they've passed and gone on. And so I think, so the next story, I could possibly write something else along those lines of what communal grief looks like, and how beautiful it is, even though it can be around tragedy. There are people who hold us up every time something happens, and that we are strong as a people, and that should be recognized. So there should maybe another story about that in the works.
So tell us once again, where can people find the article? The article is titled, When Gun Violence Ends, Young Lives, These Men Prepare the Graves. It's on Kaiser Health News. I know the website, but where else can it be seen?
KHN.org, right, is our website. But this story, if they would like to listen to it, NPR published this story, and so it's available on NPR's website. Also was published recently by the Chicago Sun-Times for listeners in your area who subscribe to that publication. And so the story it just went everywhere. I mean, I think more so than anything, people felt that thread of humanity. We all live, and unfortunately, at some point, we all have a birth date and we all have a death date. And I think that is a universal element that we all can relate to. And so it was published widely everywhere, but NPR, the Sun-Times, and of course, KHN.org.
Cara Anthony, Kaiser Health News Midwest Correspondent, thanks for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
America's Heroes Group, we'll be right back.